today's webinar with the support of Telogis. So before we begin the webinar, a few quick points about the setup and a brief background and break for those of you less familiar with our work. And then we'll hand over to today's speakers, and we have representatives from Telogis, Applied Driving Techniques, Zurich and Mulholland Contracts, all experts in their field who will be able to share their knowledge with you. So before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to say thank you to Telogis, who sponsored it, and without whose funding we wouldn't be able to deliver this session for you. So now you should all be able to see my presentation and hear the audio alongside it. As attendees, you're all muted, so you don't need to worry about any background noise from your offices. After each speaker, there will be the opportunity for a question and answer session, and there are two ways to put forward your question. Firstly, there's a chat box on the right-hand webinar panel where you can send your question at any point during the speaker's presentation, and we'll put that question to them at the end of their session. Alternatively, there's a raise hand icon on the same panel. You can press this during the Q&A and we will unmute you, and you can put your question to the speaker directly over the phone. Now I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of BRAKE, who we are and what we do, before handing over to the first speaker. So BRAKE is a national road safety charity that exists to stop the needless deaths and serious injuries that happen on roads every day, and to make streets and communities safer for everyone and care for families bereaved and injured in road crashes. So as a charity, we have four main aims, which you can see on the screen now. So we want a world that has zero road deaths and injuries, and people that can get around in ways that are safe, sustainable, healthy and fair. So BRAKE's vision is quite simply a world that has zero road deaths and injuries. So our three main focuses are support, campaigning and education. One way in which we do this is through our helpline. So we run a support helpline in the UK for people bereaved and seriously injured in road crashes. And on the screen now you can see some information on the support our helpline can provide and the support we gave in 2015. In addition to the helpline, we also provide support literature and work very closely with police forces throughout the UK, so that when someone does receive that knock on the door from a family liaison officer, they're providing them with the best practice support literature. We also campaign nationally and regionally to raise awareness among the public, and also to lobby the government and push for change in road safety legislation. So an example of this is our 2016 Roads to Justice campaign, which centred around getting justice for bereaved families. The campaign launched outside Parliament and gained a lot of media attention, and resulted in the government opening a consultation on criminal driving sentencing. We also do a lot of campaigning more generally on raising awareness of a range of topics, some of which you can see on the screen now. So they cover a range of issues within dangerous driving and across different community groups. So you can see campaigning makes up a lot of what we do, and here are some other ways in which we do it. And the final side of what we do is awareness raising and education in communities. This is done through projects such as Beep Beep Days. These are run with nursery school children, aimed at raising awareness and teaching them about road safety at a young age. It's also a great way for some of the corporates we work with to get involved and go out into their local communities and show that they're passionate about road safety and want to help the communities they operate in. The other side of education is that we work with employers of at-work drivers through our BRAKE Professional Membership Scheme. This global membership scheme was founded in 1996 and aims to share best practice amongst employers. We run an annual calendar of events, including webinars such as today's, and seminars and training throughout the year. We also have annual flagship events such as the Fleet Safety Conference and Fleet Safety Awards, which you can see more information on screen now. They're open to companies of all sizes. The conference aims to share best practice and also provides an ideal opportunity to network. And the awards are open to anyone and free to enter, and aim to recognise the achievements of those working to help reduce the number of road crashes involving at-work drivers. In addition to these events, Brake Professional also produces a lot of resources for employers, including guidance reports on introducing policies and share best practice case studies. Alongside that, we provide employers with tools to use directly with their drivers. So on screen now, you can see some of the posters, infographics and videos you can use to engage your drivers. So on to today's webinar. I'm going to hand you over to our first speaker, who's Dan Lancaster from Methodologies. So, Dan?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm hoping you can share my screen. So let's just switch across and make that full screen if I can. There we go. So if any of you guys can give me the thumbs up that you can see my screen, that would be great. If not, I'm probably rifling through a heap of slides back to the start. So in thinking, there we go, guys. So yeah, in thinking through content for some opening remarks today, and looking across the range of speakers we've got on the call, Nigel from Applied Driving, Andy from Zurich, and Kevin Breen from Mulholland Contracts, it's pretty clear that the Telogis make up the technology cornerstone of that. So in the interest of sticking to what you know, that's the area I'm going to talk about in my opening remarks. And when looking at the title of the webinar as well, Road Safety, Back to Basics, it can't always be said that the technology companies and companies providing IT to reduce incidents on the road and increase safety of employees and staff that have to drive for a living isn't always the way with technology companies. So you'll be glad to hear, keep it fairly simple with our single platform for connected intelligence. So bringing a range of technologies, some that sit on the back end, some that sit in the office, so software suites, as well as reporting and alerting tools, right through to devices that I'm going to talk about this afternoon that can be put right in the palm of your hand. Just so you guys are aware, the Telogis platform is wide-reaching. As you can see from the colours here, we get involved in routing and scheduling of business fleets, so putting optimised plans together and making sure the resources are used most effectively right before anybody even sets out on the road or sets out carrying out their deliveries. And that's the block in the top right-hand corner, the green block. And down in the bottom left-hand corner, the mobility suite, I'll talk about shortly. But what a lot of organisations will know us for is the block in the top left-hand corner, Telogis Fleet, which is our telemetry tool and our ability to gather information about safe driving and the metrics that contribute to safe driving in a simple format and displaying that back to the users. A little bit of a background on the organisation. If you know of us, great. If not, we actually merged with Verizon Telematics in the middle of last year, or towards the summer of last year. So that process is undergoing. So I must make sure to underline our naming convention is Telogis, a Verizon company, soon to be seen and branded as Verizon Telematics in earnest. But importantly, our background starts back in 2001 and you'll see some of the names on the right-hand side of the screen there, where we've carried out these implementations of driver safety programs. So we've got the war wounds, we've got the scars, we've got, you know, the best practice implementation learnings from some small and some large-scale implementations, and you'll hear from Kevin later about our recent implementation last year at Mulholland Contracts. As you can see there, offices around the globe, geographies worldwide, and that figure of 700 is actually going to get significantly larger as per my previous comments. But important point to underline is it's a software as a service tool that we offer to the marketplace very successfully, and we have all the appropriate professional services, project management, implementation, development, training, right through to 24/7 support for these technologies, and making sure that they fit around the operation rather than the operation fit around the IT. So bringing that back to the point of the webinar, reducing road risk, I think it wasn't that long ago people were sat around PC screens pointing at reports and maybe even having printed out copies for driver one-to-one assessments, but may or may not be carried out from month to month, even quarter to quarter, but largely around those areas in the top left-hand corner: speeding, hard braking, and hard acceleration being the headline ones when talking about road risk and driving that change. We get involved in, as I say, the professional services elements that start even before then, so benchmarking and actually getting a baseline of the position of be it a utilities organisation, a distributor, or you know, even a white collar company car fleet that might be out there in the field, is trying to get a clear baseline of that position and then take an appropriate stance in terms of messaging to drivers, as well as the right technology, the right reporting, maybe even the right dashboards out into the operation to get that best improved performance. As I say, historically that might have been achieved through reports, but as time's moved on and developments have gone with it, and we're now able to offer live KPI dashboards on driving style that link back to individual drivers, as you can see on the left-hand side there, named drivers. Any of those parameters you can see in the screen: distance, idling over 10 minutes, speeding incidents related to posted speed limits of given roads, or even hard braking, hard accelerating, can be ranked and scored accordingly depending on what we learn in that benchmarking phase. So these tools are very powerful. You'll see they're very colourful and simple to interpret. Red, amber, green is the mainstay, and we try and apply that now increasingly to mobile technologies. So the prevalence of smartphones, tablets out on the road, even PDA devices, Android or iOS compatible, we're able to select from our suite of mobile applications, Logbook, Supervisor, Telogis Spotlight, through to navigational tools to try and make the job of achieving the work, carrying out the deliveries, hitting service level agreements, whatever the business line you guys are in, easier to do and easier to monitor and maintain. And the one I specifically wanted to talk about is our coaching application, Telogis Coach, and the idea of a self-assessment model. So what we're really driving at is, rather than what was prevalent in the past and using reporting, and often it taking a while to gather those reports, the credibility of those reports being called into question, is really using that same data that's being collected and putting it right in the palm of the hand of the given driver, and then turning the game round and saying, right, well, there's bonuses, there's remuneration, there's potentially rewards up for grabs at the end of the week, the month, the quarter, whatever that appropriate time period is. But don't wait until the review or when you sat down with your manager. Download the application and you can get a secure local view at any point right up to the present day of your driving performance and how and where you're scoring points or losing points, more accurately, in those areas that contribute to your road safety. So really, underlining that back to basics approach. If you're not braking much, not accelerating too hard, you're driving defensively, you're staying within the speed limits or the posted speed limits of the roads you're going on, you can score a lot of points. And again, depending on unions out there and your access to or your company's preference towards sharing that data, you can actually have the capability now to put that into dashboards and scorecards and even leaderboards, as you'll see there on the screen, just to encourage that peer pressure, to encourage that competitive spirit that exists deep down in all of us, to drive up that scorecard and really try and get after those remunerations. And they don't have to be, big extensions of, big financial extensions. They can be simple things we saw, such as, the top parking space in the car park that's nearest the door. And you'll find that over the course of time, the guys in the fleet start wanting to drive their way up that leaderboard and overachieve, and those remunerations can be tweaked and move forward. So what was a sensible amount of harsh braking and harsh accelerating a month or two ago, the whole average will have moved in a positive direction. And then to encourage that competitive spirit to keep going and to keep driving after those benefits, you can just slowly tweak up the expected level of performance in those areas, constantly driving that road safety agenda and constantly making improvements to your fleet safety policies and your expected improvement areas in those aspects: hard braking, hard acceleration, speeding, hard cornering, whatever the case may be. So really, in conclusion, important areas are that the technology platform has come a long way. It isn't a case of printing out reams and reams of reports in the modern era. Dashboards, KPI-based dashboards that are tuned into what your fleet's expecting, and giving the ability to self-assess to the drivers out in the field, setting good goals, keeping a good focus on communication, so regularly reviewing that position in the table and driving that improvement through encouragement, and allowing sensible remuneration and to feed into the program as well. Making that information freely available, so instead of it having to be only recovered in one-to-ones or managers meetings, providing that in mobile applications direct to the end user, additional coaching, and, as I say, trying to cultivate that motivational culture. So technology's out there for this now, KPI dashboarding, red, amber, green reporting, and well as mobile applications. And I think as the technology cornerstone of this webinar, that's where I wanted to pass over to Nigel, or perhaps back to Zariat, to hand over to Nigel for discussions about how that can feed into improvement in applied driving techniques. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dan. Just while we've still got you on, so you've got quite a thorough step-by-step there. What would you say you see as the kind of first step in implementing telematics in a smaller company? So if you're from an SME and you're really looking at your first step into telematics? How would you kind of get management buy-in?
Management buy-in, yeah. I think the savings, not just around fleet safety, but again, these are fairly widespread across the marketplace. But in terms of fuel performance, reduction in CO2 footprint is a big one these days. So environmental aspects as well. What I would say, there's a big list now, and we have set slide decks and union-based toolkits that you can delve into to select from that is most appropriate to your business. So if you know what previous technology projects have been successful and what agenda they leaned on, I mean, for the benefit of this webinar, I think it was important to keep it on, road safety and the simplicity of that area. But if it's environmental, for example, then that's the area to explore. And the technology often is the same that goes into the vehicle, a very simple GPS device as a starting point. It can be a plug-in unit so that it doesn't need to be wired into the engine management system. And then, as I said earlier, the best step is to get that benchmarking. There's a wise old saying that if you can't see it, you can't manage it. And a lot of organisations out there will be in that starting point. It feels like a good idea, but how do we take our first steps into that area? And actually, Kevin from Mulholland, if you can, wait till that part of the conversation later on, had exactly those apprehensions, those reservations when first engaging in it. So there's some great content to listen out for there.
Right, that's perfect. Thank you, Dan. We're just going to pass on to Nigel from Applied Driving Techniques now.
Wonderful, thank you.
And we should be able to see his screen.
Okay.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. Nigel Lawrence from Applied Driving Techniques. So it's kind of, I think, my slides and presentation really does sort of filter on nicely from sort of Dan's introduction there, reference to telemetry and what have you, and some really good points around actually the implementation side of things, which is very, very important when looking at managing road risk generally. It's interesting how many organisations don't necessarily know where the best place is to start when they're looking to manage risk within the organisation, and focusing on the areas that actually sort of need the most attention in the beginning, and then developing that culture, which that's a real theme through the slides that I'll put together today, is looking at culture generally, actually creating it in the first instance, and then developing that sort of year on year and looking to achieve what you're looking to achieve. So I'm going to talk a little bit today kind of very much around sort of what we work with organisations to achieve, and obviously, work-related road safety is extremely prevalent now. It's a very big subject, and there's so many different things that sort of fall into this category, which require thought for organisations all over the country, and obviously on a global level as well. And obviously, one of the most important things by far is a duty of care. So as an organisation, there's very much a responsibility now with various different acts, like, for example, Corporate Manslaughter, Homicide Act, and Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, along with HSE Driving at Work guidance, in making sure that, so far as reasonably practical, that you are achieving a level of duty of care and managing all employees who carry out at work journeys. What's quite interesting with a lot of organisations we start working with is actually how many organisations do not know who drives for work for them, and actually just getting that first initial sort of step through the door and having a conversation that actually involves, well, who drives for you? It's generally very, very easy to identify, for example, company car drivers and cash allowance takers, but actually there's a lot of companies out there who have a lot of people who are driving occasionally. What vehicles are they driving? Are they driving their own vehicles? Are there checks to make sure they're adequately roadworthy? And even just achieving that kind of basic level of understanding, in order to start building up a risk profile, can actually be quite a challenge. The obvious part around the financial benefits of managing work-related road safety is naturally, you're looking to achieve fewer crashes and collisions, and the obvious savings around, for example, lost working and manager time, higher car costs, fuel savings, and that will probably lean on to Andy's slides later on in reference to the insurance industry. So, for example, hidden costs, generally speaking, hidden costs associated to be around 4 times the cost of bent metal, and actually, because those costs are hidden, very often they're not seen, and of course they're not taken into account. Now, for example, if you're an organisation which has X number of drivers who are doing, for example, multi-drop and delivering packages all over the country, there's an awful lot of impact on sort of productivity and what have you by having potentially 2 or 3 individuals off the road because they've been involved in a crash or collision that, for example, could be speed orientated. Corporate social responsibility and risk of harm is particularly important, and as an organisation, you definitely want to be promoting that image, green credentials in particular, which is something that Dan mentioned, from an environmental perspective, and looking to ensure that you're documenting and actually actively doing a best practice approach towards people who drive on business for you. And again, there's a reduced risk of injury, related absenteeism, which it can again have a direct impact. So just a short definition around corporate manslaughter and the Homicide Act from 2007. So as an offence, the organisation is guilty if the way in which its activities are managed or organised causes a person's death and amounts to a gross breach of a relevant duty of care owed by the organisation to the deceased, only if the way in which its activities are managed by senior management is a substantial element of the breach, and with a penalty which potentially an unlimited fine and the publicity order, which it's quite an interesting point there when you look at senior management, because it's interesting how many organisations have a very, very short and small understanding of where the accountability lies within the organisation. So who does it lie with? Does it lie with the chairman? Does it lie with the managing director? Does it lie with the health and safety director? And that really does come back to the culture piece and really educating that actually that responsibility goes across the business and through the business. And I would say probably one of the biggest challenges that we find is working with customers to achieve quite a high level of engagement with, say, for example, line managers. I think that's something that generally as a trend is starting to increase. Maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, there was probably a lot less emphasis on involving line managers within fleet safety generally across organisations, where actually now that's probably becoming a much hotter topic, and especially with the responsibility level that there is on a line manager. So just a couple of examples, a bit of a case analysis, and these are linked to fatigue, which is always going to be an interesting one. Now, this particular first case, a company called MJ Graves International, and this goes back to 2003, where a lorry collided with a stationary vehicle and killed the driver. So this one was one where the driver had fallen asleep at the wheel and had completed a 20-hour shift whilst working. On investigation, it was very clear there was some organisational failures, for example, tachographs falsified on the vehicle, very little control or monitoring around driver hours, rest breaks, and the result in that was that the driver and the transport manager were both prosecuted, and under manslaughter charges they both received a term of 4 years custody. Second case in question was a company called Produce Connection. This involved an employee who crashed a van into a lorry and died whilst driving home. This was following a third consecutive working shift of nearly 20 hours and falling asleep at the wheel from fatigue. So very obvious there that some failings were in place in terms of policies, procedures, and the way things worked for example, employees who should never be working that level of work, and that level of driving. And that resulted in Section 2 and 3 Health and Safety Work Act charges brought with fines applied. So as a couple of cases, fatigue is obviously a very important one. There's a lot of individuals driving for business who are doing a lot of hours. How well are they managing those hours as an organisation? Are they promoting that? How rigid is the policy to make sure that it's being promoted in awareness to take a break every 2 hours? So a little bit around process and policy, and kind of goes back to what I said initially around how important it is to manage this in the first instance. And it's really important to understand that risk before you try to manage. And what you tend to find quite often is very, very common, is that organisations will say, we have a huge insurance premium, all of our drivers are crashing, we need to send everybody out and do some practical driver training behind the wheel. Really, really important to try and understand why that's the right approach, because in most instances, actually, that's not the right approach. You need to, at the very, very first step, look at managing that risk. Firstly, policies. Really, really important to have the right policies in place, and how are they communicated? The audit trail must absolutely show that every individual who drives for business has read that policy and understood that policy. And again, that needs to be applied consistently across the business. That shouldn't be something where, for example, company that has 50-50 split between company vehicle users and cash allowance users, exactly the same process should be applied in both cases, and it should be very, very well communicated. And risk assessments, really, really good tool to use to look at, initially assessing, well, where is that risk within the organisation? Is there a reason why X number of crashes have happened driving early in the morning? What are we doing as a business to promote awareness around that? Those risk assessments, very much in line with HSE guidance, should look at things like the driver profile, the journey in the vehicle. What is that journey profile like? As an organisation, we could have 60% of individuals who do a high level of driving in, say, rural or urban areas. So again, really promoting awareness of the risks associated with driving in those particular environments and how that can increase your level of risk. It's really, really important to then take the results of those risk assessments and look at those. Again, they should be done on a regular basis. It's amazing how a risk profile can change very, very quickly, say year on year. For example, somebody who completes a risk assessment today may only be a particularly occasional user for a company, but then all of a sudden has a change of job role. They could be doing 30, 40,000 miles per annum in a new sales role, have very, very little experience in doing those sort of miles on an annual basis. How is that identified, and how's that managed as a risk? And again, the audit trail is there to make sure that any targeted interventions that need to be made are there. They can be implemented. And again, that really does, the emphasis on the targeted piece there is very, very strong. It's ensuring that the right level of training is applied where necessary. It's amazing how many drivers can have a particularly high level of exposure to risk, but actually, they haven't had a crash or collision, driving for 20 years for the same employer, no points on the license, not particularly high risk driver, but they have a very, very high exposure to risk. So that should be managed efficiently by promoting that awareness. And kind of on to safety culture, really. It's interesting how in some organisations, certainly in respect of driving at work, there is minimal safety culture, very, very little. And that takes time. It's not something that, when you implement sort of a fleet risk management approach, that it all of a sudden just, catches on instantly, and organisations, it takes a lot of time to implement and get that culture working. So, for example, there may be a culture within other parts of the business. So it could be a company that has, a factory attached as part of their operation. So there's going to be very, very strong emphasis on health and safety generally across the site. It could be in the warehouse. If it's a factory that's, involving production lines, then that's going to be particularly strong. Really, really important that translates into driving at work as well. Because ultimately, as you're probably aware, for most organisations, that's probably the highest risk activity that is involved as part of that business, and that needs to be managed, and it needs to be managed effectively. And the awareness, I mean, I've emphasised that on more than one occasion, but developing good habits. I mean, a couple of examples there: reverse parking. You know, it's interesting how many organisations do insist on a reverse parking rule. We work with a company called SSE, where they have a reverse parking rule at most of their sites. So just promoting awareness of the benefits of that. Why is that process in place, and what are the benefits of that, A, to the employee and actually to the employer as well. And things like vehicle checks, you know, it's really, really important, especially that is for, not necessarily for company car drivers or company vehicle users, but could also be for individuals using their own vehicle occasionally. You know, that how often a vehicle's being checked, tyres, you know, lights, water, all of that sort of thing is really, really important to ensure that people are doing that on a regular basis. Things like campaigns are really, really good as well. So, for example, that could be safety bulletins being issued generally around the business. They could be seasonal, for things like winter driving. At the same time, they could be sort of more topical. Could be, for example, today, February, something issued out around dangers of driving, you know, on rural roads, and how there could be a heightened exposure to risk there. And it's important to remember it's a continuous process. You know, you don't implement fleet risk management, do it for a year, develop, you know, a culture of sorts, and all of a sudden that's it, you've achieved what you do. It's an ongoing process, and there should always be a strive to improve. It should be achieving maximum levels of compliance as an organisation, and looking at reducing and constantly reducing, you know, crashes and collisions. And that culture should also allow and accept challenge as well. It's really important that it's an engaged, probably, you know, I would say an engaged topic across any business, whereby there should never be an issue in somebody being able to challenge and say, well, actually, no. Our policy does say that our, you know, journey planning should mean that I don't ever drive more than X number of hours per day. My line manager is saying to me, I want you to do this drive first thing in the morning from A to B, which is going to take 7 hours. That needs to be challenged. You know, it's written into a policy. It needs to be part of the culture that that's challenged, and that that's not acceptable, and that there's a proper procedure. And again, it's a key work activity. Safety absolutely should start from the minute you get behind the wheel of that car in the morning. And kind of really just to summarise, really recap on what I've said, I guess. So, you know, understanding the risks before implementing any control measures, you know, really, really important. And that starts with policy and procedures, which some instances can be absolutely nothing, you know, nothing in place whatsoever. Without that, how do you look to enforce, you know, policies and procedures? Really, really important that you have those, but again, there needs to be an audit trail behind them, and they need to be enforced as well. And root cause incidents. If I work for an organisation where we've had 200% claims ratio, for example, in a year, well, what's the root cause for those incidents? Why are they happening? Where are the trends? And again, this is where the telemetry piece comes in that Dan was talking about before myself. A lot of really, really good information that comes out, you know, from that sort of software. So again, combining that with things like claim stats, you know, that could be a really, really good tool to look at identifying root cause and implementing the right measures to reduce that. Senior management buy-in, really, really essential. You know, it's amazing how many customers I see where actually senior management are the last people to do a risk assessment. You know, that again comes back to the culture. It's really, really important that if the senior management have time to get that done, you know, the emphasis should be expected that drivers are exactly the same, and it has to be across the board. Line management should always be a good example. And again, this comes back to the challenging piece. You know, that example and that responsibility is really, really important for line managers now, and I think that will only continue to grow sort of in the future. And any program, the effectiveness of that has got to be measured by changing attitude. You know, the attitude is a real key one there. Going back to telematics, that's a great way to measure a change in attitude over a period of time. And that's a very, very easy way to demonstrate where the culture change is working, is happening. And again, it should be a continuous process that continues to evolve. And that is it for myself. Thank you.
Right, that's great. Thank you, Nigel. Just a couple of questions quickly. You mentioned companies that maybe don't see themselves as drivers or employ a lot of grey fleet drivers.
Yes.
How are they usually affected by corporate manslaughter charges? Just because obviously it's done on a case-by-case basis and done on annual turnover. Would you say that it could hit them just as hard as, say, a bigger organisation?
I think again, are we talking in context of maybe, say, like an organisation that employs contractors who potentially will only be working, for the organisation for a short period of time? Just to understand the context of the question.
Small organisation who might not even have a fleet safety manager in place because they don't really see it as their key work role. How does it tend to affect companies like that?
Well, I think it comes back to that line earlier on in the presentation, so far as reasonably practical. So I think for an organisation that has, like a workforce, typically described as you have there, the absolute key is, if they're getting behind the wheel of a vehicle, well, what's the risk? What's the exposure to risk generally? For the type of role they're doing, and before anything, have they got a license? The most important thing, are they licensed to drive in the first instance? What type of role, are they doing? If, for example, that could be like commercial vehicles, for example, and it's, a fleet of long wheelbase transits, the individuals, as part of that induction program, and that's probably where this question would be answered easiest is the importance of the induction. So, if, for example, I was coming to work for that organisation, I was driving a long wheelbase transit for the first time, have I ever had any training on that particular vehicle? Yeah. Have I, if I haven't, what are we doing, to put into place, proper steps to mitigate the risk of me having a crash or collision? And that could be like familiarisation. It could be, it could be anything. But I think it's really, really important to be able to understand that sort of level of risk for that particular job role or that particular industry, because again, it varies from industry to industry, I think, and you've probably got a particularly higher risk for a food delivery company, for example, than you maybe have for a pharmaceutical, sales function, for example. If hopefully that answers the question.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I'm just going to pass over to Andy Price from Zurich now. Andy, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. We were having some technical challenges earlier with the audio.
All right, yeah, we can see your screen now. That's perfect.
Perfect. So, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to talk about some of the financial aspects of managing risk. But before I start, I don't think any of us should lose sight of the real reason that any organisation should do this is to prevent any of our employees being involved in one of the collisions that today, if it's an average day on the road in the UK, will lead to 5 people losing their lives and 61 people being seriously injured. So that's the real reason why we should do it. But we live in a commercial reality, so often the financial elements of risk management are the ones that make the managers that we've been talking about earlier come to the decision to actually do something. So today I thought I'd talk about the things that you can see on the agenda screen now. So I'm going to talk first of all about how a premium is calculated, because we've come to realise that many people actually don't understand what elements go into that and how they can affect that. So I think maybe that will give you some interesting insight. But I'm going to argue that actually what you should be worried about or more concerned about is the total cost of risk, because that is the real financial impact on the business and where you're going to see the biggest gains if you get this right. I'll give you my take on what an effective risk management process looks like, picking up on some of the stuff that we've heard from the first 2 speakers, and then finish with a case study from one of our customers who've got this right, and share with you some of the financials and some of the improvements that they've seen going forward, and some of the benefits that's realised. So how is a premium calculated? Contrary to popular belief, it's not done on the back of an envelope or in old money back of a fag packet. There is some science behind it, as you might expect from a large financial organisation. Now, the graphic you're seeing on the screen now, the large box represents the total premium that any fleet will pay. But what I'd like you to do, first of all, is concentrate and focus on the dark blue box at the bottom, entitled base premium. And there's two elements of that. The first is what we call the expected attritional claims. Now, these are your everyday claims that are likely to happen. So we're not talking about the big claims here with sort of large third-party injuries. These are your everyday claims that will go through to your insurance company. And what we know is that they're a very good indicator, looking at the trends in these, of what's going to happen in the future year. So that is the fundamental building block of which an underwriter will start to base the premium for a fleet risk. Now, on top of that, there's a provision for large losses, because not every fleet will have a large loss, and not every fleet will pay enough premium to cover the large losses that they're having. So the way insurance works is that those provisions for large losses are shared amongst all the customers that an insurer has. That's just a way of spreading the pain, if you like, across the entire book of business that insurer has. And basically, that's the base premium. And obviously, it goes without saying that anything that you can do to affect the frequency of claims, which is going to affect that expected attritional claims element of that calculation, is going to make that box smaller. Because the interesting thing is that the yellow bits on top are basically all percentages based on the base premium. So anything that you can do to impact on those expected attritional claims through risk management activities is going to lower that base premium, and then because they're all percentages, that yellow box is going to shrink as well. Now, the other thing you have direct control over is the claims handling expense, because again, the insurer will base that on the expected number of collisions you're going to have in the insurance year. So again, if you can demonstrate downward trends based on your risk management activity, then the underwriter is going to have some level of confidence that those number of claims are going to come down, so your claims handling expenses are going to come down. So you can very directly influence the premium. Now, that sort of calculation I've just gone through is applicable for large fleets, and every insurer has a different definition of what large means. The smaller the fleet, the less influence you're going to have on that calculation, because your claims history, because it's only based on a small number of vehicles, is going to be less statistically significant than that for a large fleet. So in smaller fleets, the underwriter will use something called exposure rating, and that's more similar to what we all understand is how our own personal car insurance is calculated based on the type of vehicle, where it's driven, the mileage exposure, and exposure factors like that. And of course, there's a blended approach, the approach I've just taken you through, and that mixture of exposure factors. But ultimately, the larger the fleet, the more the premium you pay is within your gift to influence based on how many collisions you're avoiding every year and what the trends are looking like in your claims experience. But as I said earlier, it's actually the total cost of risk that's perhaps a bigger issue, or should be a bigger issue for you. The International Loss Control Institute say that for every £1 an insurer pays out, there's £8 to £53 in uninsured losses. I'll say that again because I find this figure staggering. For every £1 we as an insurer pay out, you as a customer see £8 to £53 in uninsured losses, depending on the severity of the incident. Now, I never justify £8 to £53. I always use, well, if this is the cost of the claim, if you double that, that's some of these uninsured losses. And when we talk about uninsured losses, it's going to be different in every business. It could be reputational risk we've heard about before. If you've got liveried vehicles, you don't want them appearing in the news, having been involved in a serious collision. It could be penalty clauses for late deliveries. It could be downtime. But the biggest and the most common uninsured loss is absenteeism. Because if someone's off for a short time, even just sort of dealing with a minor repair, then they're not doing what you paid them to do. And there is a financial impact on your business because of that. The issue is, and the reason they're called hidden costs or uninsured losses, is because they don't appear on the balance sheet, so you don't know about them. But if I take you through a worked example, you can start to see how this may affect your business. So I've put some typical claims data here, and I don't know how this resonates with your fleet. If you do a car fleet, then the average claim cost is unlikely to be a long way away from £1,000. If you use that 2 times multiplier to give us an estimate of the hidden cost, that gives us £2,000. And I've said in this example, 25% of the vehicles in the fleet will be involved in a claim every year, and the profitability of this company is 10%. Now, I've got no idea about who's on the phone, but some of you will probably bite my arm off for a profitability of 10%. But what these figures show is that for every vehicle in the fleet, not just those that are involved in a collision, but for every vehicle in the fleet, that company would need to raise £5,000 of revenue per vehicle to make enough profit to fund the uninsured losses. And of course, if the claims frequency is higher or the profitability is lower, then that figure is even higher. So you can start to see, if you think, if those figures resonate with you, you start to see how many vehicles you have in your fleet and you do the maths, it's going to start to get a significant number that's going to have a financial impact on your business. But you don't need to stop there. I sometimes talk about Kit Kats at this stage, but I'm going to talk about truck mirrors. And it wouldn't be a massive difference for a van or a car mirror. But there was a customer of ours who worked out every time they broke a truck mirror, and this is quite common because they're delivering bags of cement like you see in the picture to urban areas, so operating in tight environments, also in tight depots. They worked out that for every mirror they broke, to make enough profit to do that mirror repair, they had to sell 285 bags of cement. And what that meant is it's very real for everyone in that business, because the drivers could understand what 285 bags of cement on the back of the truck looked like, the depot managers could understand it, the supervisors could understand it, the senior managers could understand it. And the smarter managers, they were thinking, well, actually, if we break less truck mirrors, some of those bags of cement can actually contribute to our profitability rather than being a drain on resource. So there's a very real financial motivation to manage risk. Even though, as I said at the beginning, we should be doing this because it's the right thing to do, ultimately there's a very good business case for us doing that based on these uninsured losses that we've been talking about. So what is the risk management process that we can implement to manage this? And I've only got one slide on this, but I'm going to take some time talking about it, because as we heard earlier, it's the risk management process starts in the assess, analyze, and understand phase, the top of the wheel that you see here. And from our perspective, I think there's 4 areas of risk to look at. The first and fundamental is what I call the organizational risk. These are the risks that arise out of whatever you're asking your employees to do when making a work-related journey. So, yes, it's important to have some robust policies and procedures in place, but it's equally important, and a lot of people don't see this sometimes, that those policies and procedures have got to dovetail into the operating practices and procedures of the business. Because without that dovetailing, what you tend to do is, if there's ever a conflict between what's required from a safety perspective and what's required from an operational perspective, operational tends to win, because that's where the driver sees that the biggest pain is going to come if they don't follow the policies and procedures. So often when we're working with our customers, it's not making sure they've got some great policies and procedures, although that's clearly important. It's actually sometimes they have to change their operating practices and procedures to allow drivers to drive safely, and create an environment in which drivers can drive safely if they choose to do so. Getting them to drive safely is a different challenge. But until that environment in which they can drive safely is created, then anything focused on the individual driver is a lot less likely to be effective at reducing the collision and claim rate. The next area of risk is that we should analyse is what I call the proven risk, the risks that have already resulted in a collision occurring. And here we're really looking at the claims that have already happened. And people come to me and say, well, Andy, you've got all the claims history from an insurance perspective. You tell me why the collisions are happening. Well, from looking at some claims data from any insurer, we can we can tell you what the root cause of the claim was, but not the root cause of the collision that caused the claim. So we advocate our customers have some sort of post-collision debrief process in place, whether that's face-to-face or on the phone, depending on how they're operating, to really delve down into the underlying reasons why that collision occurred. And the most important question to ask yourselves in that situation is, what have we as an organisation done that may have contributed to that collision occurring? It's a really important question to ask, but a really difficult one to ask as well. Because if we understand the root cause of why the collisions are occurring, then we can do something about it. Without that, we're relying on guesswork. The next area of risk that we advocate looking at is the theoretical risk that a driver will be involved in a collision in the future, and I think Nigel covered that in what a risk assessment process should look like. And then the last area is what I call the dynamic risk, how a vehicle is being driven 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is really where we heard from Telligis about driver behaviour telemetry data. And again, just as a heads up there, it's we've seen a lot of people using telemetry and had no underlying change in the collision and claim rate, because there's some self-improvement that drivers might do, but ultimately the key success factor in telemetry is the line manager looking at the data and sitting down with the driver and understanding why the driver behaviour sort of metrics are coming out as they are, because it's like the collisions. You know that there's lots of harsh braking or there's lots of speeding events, but until you have that conversation with the driver, you don't know why. Is it they're just a bad driver, or is there an underlying management or organisational or operational reason why the driver is behaving in that way? So once we've done the assess, analyse and understand piece right first, we want to implement some control measures to do something about it. And our approach here is to go back to sort of standard health and safety principles for the risks that we want to manage, and say, well, what can we do to eliminate those risks, which is usually something that we have to do at a management level. If we can't eliminate it, can we substitute it for something of a lower risk, which again is generally something at a management level? And if we can't do that, what can we reduce? How can we reduce the risk? And that could be a management initiative or something focused on an individual driver. And by going through that sort of hierarchical process, it gives us the greatest chance of being able to focus on individual drivers exactly what they need, or individual groups of drivers exactly what they need, because quite often in organisations there's different groups of drivers where different interventions are likely to be successful. But also what we found is that anything we can do at a management level to tackle the risk is much more sustainable than anything at a driver level. And the last part of the process is maintain, monitor and review. I'm not talking about vehicle maintenance here. I'm talking about maintaining awareness. As Nigel said, building the safety culture in the business is a tremendously important aspect. And just because a business has got a strong safety culture in the factory or office doesn't mean it's going to have a strong safety culture on the road. Driving is a very emotive issue. A lot of effort and time needs to be spent building that safety culture through the communication strategy and things that we've heard about earlier. What do you measure? What do you monitor? Well, the key performance indicators will be number of crashes, types of crashes, severity of crashes, and if we got the telemetry data, that the driver behaviours coming out of it. And last but not least is the review process, because this is deliberately drawn as a circle, because the first time round, if you assess, analyse and understand it right, if you get that bit right first, you can put some management systems in place and start managing the risk. But over time, things change. Legislation changes. Think about mobile phones in the last few years. Technology changes. Think about the introduction of autonomous emergency braking, which is having a tremendous impact on reducing rear-end collisions. But most importantly, the way your organisation works changes. And if the risk management process doesn't change to keep pace with that, then the collision rate's going to go up. So hopefully that was a clear walk through the risk management process. I just thought I'd share with you a case study from Iron Mountain, which is in the public domain, who back in 2008 started working with us because they had some very, very steep premium increases, and they didn't see any end to that looking at the performance of their fleet. About 400 vehicles of a similar size to what you see on the screen now, and some a little bit bigger. And the first graph I'm going to show you looks at their total incident rate. So this is a combination of own damage incidents and what we call third-party incidents, those resulting in a claim, because their insurance coverage was third-party only. So this is a combination of data that they provided us. And you can see that they've had some significant improvements over from 2008 to 2014. In the early years, they focused on the management. They invested in some in-house driver trainers. And in 2011, 2012, they invested in some driver behaviour telemetry. And whilst that's encouraging, you could argue that actually, in the last few years on this graph, there actually hasn't been much change in the total number of incidents. And I'd accept that challenge. But if we look at the next graph, which again is a combination of third-party costs from the insurance and their own damage costs from their repair costs, we can see a very different picture, where nothing much changed in the early years, but in the later years there's been some significant improvements in their total cost of risk from that perspective. And I said in 2012, 2011, 2012, they invested in driver behaviour telemetry. In 2012, they started focusing on the speed against speed limit measurement within their system. And their definition of speeding is anything 5 miles an hour or more over the posted speed limit. So this is the graph that from those 2 years, and you can see there's been a fantastic improvement in the amount of speeding incidents that they have. And now they're seeing on average 0.4 speeding incidents per vehicle per week. I'll say that again because that's quite impressive. It's 0.4 speeding incidents per vehicle per week. So essentially, they're not speeding. And you think how easy it would be to pick up a speeding incident when changing from one speed limit into a lower speed limit. We think that's very impressive. And if I just flick back to the graph previously, we got no definitive evidence of this, but we think those improved sort of cost of claims, again, this is a combination of own damage and third party, that they've seen from 2012 to 2014 is a result of this focus on speeding and making sure that drivers are driving at an appropriate speed limit. And they've seen some headline figures you can read for yourself. I guess in addition to that, there's been about a 4.5% reduction in maintenance costs. So all very impressive, and actually the return on investment was just the reduction in fuel usage from the investment in the telemetry, ignoring all the improvements in the collision and claims. But actually, they've seen some improvements in their premium. Because of the trends that we saw in their data, we were happy to give them the reductions that you see on the screen, because A, they earned it, and B, we still remained profitable at those lower levels of premium. So we're delighted when a customer has got a well-managed risk program in place, because we can work together to save both our organisations money. So to sum up, I think we went through how a premium is calculated, and I think that's insightful, but actually it's the total cost of risk that is a bigger issue for all organisations. It's those uninsured losses that don't appear on a balance sheet that actually really impact on the business. And if you get that risk management process right in your organisation, then hopefully some of your equivalent of those bags of cement, rather than being a drain on resource, can impact on your profitability. So hopefully that was insightful. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll take any questions now if you've got any.
That was great. Thank you, Andy. Those are really interesting points in there. So as you've kind of just touched on right at the end there, obviously a lot of the costs are hidden, and it's one of those things where you can't really bring it to the board if there's no proof that this has been happening. So it's hard to say to the board that you will save money because you won't be paying out salaries to people who are off the road or anything. How would you say people could kind of get around trying to make these points without any previous stats to go on?
Well, I think the International Loss Control Institute, £8 to £53 for every £1 an insurer pays out. I think you'll get laughed out of the boardroom if you use those, which is why we go on a two times multiplier from the claims cost, which is a conservative estimate. And I think if you explain what the uninsured losses are, whilst you can't put a concrete figure on that, I think most switch-on senior managers will actually, yeah, we can see that, you know, someone's absent for a short while, or we've got to hire some temporary labour, or we're paying overtime to get someone else to cover. They can sort of, those figures will resonate with them. So, yeah, we won't have an accurate figure we can use, but we can have a believable figure we can use and that can start the dialogue and the conversation.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Andy. I'm just going to pass over to Kevin Breen now, who is from Mulholland Contracts. Kevin, can you hear us?
Yes, go for it.
All right, that's great. So we're going to just do a quick Q&A session with Kevin on how they've implemented Telogis telematics into their fleet. So first of all, Kevin, could you just provide us a bit of a background on what Mulholland Contracts do?
Hi, we're a civil engineering company, basically specialise in groundworks. We also carry out surfacing utilities contracts for major house builders throughout central Scotland. We've got 100 vans, 50 cars and 4 HGVs. So because obviously the size of the company, we don't have a large team to look after it. So a lot of this comes on my head effectively to look after. So I just kind of looked at what sort of systems are out there to actually try to manage this.
That's great. So what prompted you to look at telematics?
Well, being a finance director, I sort of looked at the cost. You know, unfortunately, being the safety, cost was for us the driving issue. Now, we were obviously having increasing insurance premiums, ever increasing fuel costs. But once you start to analyse this, you were looking at the reasons why both the insurance and fuel bills were going up. And a lot to do with how the actual vehicles were getting used. Now, these vehicles are getting used out with our control. The guys pick the vehicles up or drive the vehicles from 6 AM to 6 PM. They're outside our control. The only way of monitoring this effectively is telematics. So we looked at one of the reasons why we looked at telematics was try to get information from the vehicles. Safety is obviously paramount as well. You know, we don't want accidents to happen. You know, I know going back to what Nigel says about hidden costs. Now, working out the cost of a vehicle being off the road, you know, it's a cost that, yes, it doesn't appear for the profit and loss, but it's a substantial cost. So if we can get the vehicles to be driving more safely, they're probably driving more slowly. So that means effectively the fuel bill is going to be reduced. Hopefully the insurance bill will be reduced, and we don't have these hidden costs of big claims.
Okay. And then before you install the telematics, did you carry out a pilot?
Well, we looked at 6 companies initially at the commercial vehicle show about 2 years ago. We were actually introduced to Dan from Ford. We obviously, to be honest with Ford, we actually met them. I never heard of the company whatsoever. You hear of Tracker, which is effectively the main name for these sort of telematics units. I spoke to 6 companies in total, including Telogis, narrowed it down to 3, got 3 in, done a sort of beauty parade to see what they can do, decided on doing the trial, which was really important because that was the only way we could actually gauge a real life situation between competing products.
Is that so? You decided to carry out a pilot to kind of test out a few different.
Well, that was it. You know, you're spending quite a lot of money on telematics. My one major concern was: is it going to work? Are we going to get too much information? Is it going to get used for 3 months and be forgotten about? That was my own being a sort of accountant saying, right, we're going to spend all this money. Initially, it's going to be all great. But after 3 months, people's either going to be sick of it because it's hard to use, hard to sort of get information out the system, so it won't be used. And all of a sudden, we spent a lot of money on a capital item that is just producing no benefit at all. So getting the trial was a sort of the only way we could actually gauge products against products. And I'm saying Dan's product was, to me, the far the better.
That's great. So what went well with the implementation? And were there
we were surprised how easy it was to install. One of the things regarding cost-wise, I was worried it was going to be a major sort of exercise to actually install the units in the vehicles. We were just simply surprised at how easy it was to actually put it in initially, and also if it was to go in a different vehicle, effectively we're doing the installation and deinstallation and reinstallation ourselves. We have a number of hired vehicles which has to be monitored as well. So it was easy enough for us to get a hired vehicle, put the actual unit in, and effectively being live with the rest of the owned vehicles we have.
Great. So how did the drivers react to the introduction of telematics?
Initially, it was kind of mixed. You know, the guys were really kind of saying, well, what's the benefit of this? But we really said, well, we can effectively improve the safety of the vehicles and also the drivers. Like anything, I don't know, the guys maybe think it was a sort of spy in the cab, but you're doing it for a purpose. And I think after a while, the guys probably realized that even watching adverts for insurance companies, they're starting to use the telematics to lower premiums. So they sort of started to sort of buy into it. You know,
yeah.
It was a sort of, we didn't really say, well, sort of force it on them and say, well, this is really because you're driving badly. It was put across the whole fleet. So it wasn't a case of some drivers believing, oh, they were getting picked on.
So what improvements have you seen since adding telematics to your fleet?
Well, the speeding is reduced. The guys know that speeding is being monitored. One of the benefits of the reporting system we've got just now is that the people who were routinely speeding are getting warned, on a weekly basis, but especially on a sort of monthly basis, how often they're speeding per month. And their speeding has reduced. It's simple that the guys they know they're being monitored. They probably don't want me sending them memos every month saying, look, can you calm down a bit? They're actually adhering to it.
Great. And have any of the benefits kind of exceeded your expectations? Has anything?
Well, let's go back to this probably installation again. You know, I was saying one of the things was I really thought it was going to be cumbersome to actually install, but the beauty of it is what's actually happened this week. We've got vehicles that are coming up for the end of the life. We've got 2 new vehicles getting delivered on Friday. Now we think they'll be up and running on Monday. You know, I'm really happy how it's working out regarding the physical installing and reinstallation of it. The amount of information we're getting out the system is far higher than we actually thought. You know, we're actually getting information regarding the performance of the actual vehicles, which is quite important to actually know. Going back to if the guy's not wearing a seatbelt, that's important to know. Also, we're getting information regarding just general the vehicle's mileage, so we know to actually get the vehicle in to service. We're getting the reports that vehicles are due for their MOTs. So what of them, it's just basic admin that the system's actually giving us. So it is saving us a considerable amount of time.
That's great. And if you were to repeat the process, what would you do differently?
To be honest, I think the systems went okay. You know, we should have done this earlier. You know, we should have looked at telematics a few years ago. But the problem was cost. You know, and also that it's a technology. It's all ever evolving. You know, telematics has changed from just recording that a person or a van or vehicle is at a specific position, a specific amount of time. You know, we're actually getting far more information regarding like speeding. I see going back to the seatbelt use. Now, these are things that, I don't know, 5 years ago we've been heard of. You can see how far technology has actually sort of increased over the last couple of years.
That's great. And then finally, what do you see as the next step in your continued improvement?
It's really for putting information on the driver's phones. I think that's going to be a good way of actually presenting information to them. We're actually going for a rollout of put smartphones to all our drivers. So this will be the sort of next step, just giving the guys more information on how they're doing. If they can see how they're driving, no one wants to be last. And I've sort of performance grid, it gets a bit of competition there. Hopefully guys will not speed so much. Hopefully the driving's going to be improved, so hopefully the safety is going to be improved. So hopefully the insurance premiums will come down.
That's perfect. Thank you, Kevin.
Sure.
Okay, thank you all the speakers for their time and Slogis for sponsoring this webinar, and everyone for listening in. A recording of today's webinar along with all the presentations will be available online after today's session. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch on professional@brake.org.uk. Thank you.